Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Low Code Enables Velocity and Quality in Software Testing, brought to you by mabl. I would like to introduce you to our presenter. Thomas Lavin is part of the product team at mabl that is building an intelligent test automation platform for Agile teams. With his experience as a manual tester, he enjoys working across engineering, product support, and UX teams to build software quality products that delight users and help them build better quality software. Without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Thomas. Thomas, go ahead.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for attending. Let's get started. And so, it's great to be with you all. As mentioned, started in manual QA and I've been a part of mabl for over 4 years now since closed beta. And so what I want to do is talk today about a couple of things related to the adoption of low code, the adoption of intelligence, and low code intelligence together. So to cover these topics, we'll start from the key market trends, because I really want to set a foundation and set the stage for discussion. And then we'll talk about the value of low code, the value of intelligence, and specifically in the context of quality engineering. And then we'll wrap this up with key takeaways on the topic. And if you, as mentioned earlier, if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll be happy to get to all of those at the end. So let's talk about the key market trends first. So to start with, I think it's not a surprise for many of you to hear that, digital transformation really has accelerated significantly in the past couple of years. It's been happening for more than the past couple of years, for the past 10 and 15 years. So it's definitely not a new thing. But certainly COVID has influenced the speed at which digital transformation is happening pretty significantly. A lot of companies during COVID, they really didn't have a real or built out way to engage with their customers in the physical world. So they really had to find a way to accelerate their digital transformation, meet their customers where they are, whether that's on a desktop application, mobile now as well. And now to accelerate digital transformation, companies had to accelerate their adoption of DevOps because the demand for technology and innovation accelerated with that digital transformation. One of the good ways we know to create high throughput, high velocity teams and outcomes is through the adoption of DevOps, the practices, the mindset, and the tools. And now these are two of the key trends here, the acceleration of digital transformation, and then the adoption of DevOps to meet that demand for innovation that's been happening, especially in the past couple of years. And thirdly, there's also the customer experience, which has really remained a tremendously high priority for everyone, and now more so than ever. The central theme that should really drive all of our decisions as quality owners is optimizing for the better customer experience. And why is this so important? It's because digital transformation, as I mentioned, has accelerated substantially during the pandemic. One example from one of our customers, NCR, is they do a lot of things with point of sale systems. You've probably used them before in some capacity. It's that the accelerated development of mobile payment systems pretty substantially within the pandemic, because consumers are wanting to keep safe and healthy when the pandemic began. They didn't want to interact with things with cash or physical cards that you normally had to swipe. They'd moved to NFC and other mobile technologies there. Users are also leveraging more devices, especially at home, between personal, work laptops, tablets, and smartphones. We're also expected to ensure that users have an excellent experience no matter the device they're on, the application that they're accessing, or just interacting with your brand and your product in general across now multiple spaces. The last one has come up pretty substantially recently, the Great Resignation, as we're calling it. If you didn't consider employee experiences before, you definitely need to now. Employees expect more flexibility now and are no longer accessing work apps from their laptop and their computer. Similarly, they're expecting better experiences from the products they're using. And so to really understand the impact of this trend, I wanted to share a few stats from recent studies that actually highlight how important it is for every quality team, whether that's QA or generally software teams, need to be focused on customer experience. Now you might say, okay, so in the context of quality and quality engineering, what can we actually do to contribute to customer experience? In one of our latest reports from mabl, the State of DevOps and Testing Benchmark Report, we learned from people that engaged in the survey that test coverage is a critical metric for them. And it actually has a very high correlation between test coverage and customer happiness. In fact, 80% of the teams who reported that they had excellent test coverage are much more likely to say that their customers ultimately love their product and have high customer happiness. And this is a pretty significant learning from our research, and it surprised myself especially. And just to call that out again, 80% of teams who said that they have excellent test coverage are much more likely to say that their customers love their product. So from a quality perspective, quality engineering perspective, test coverage is really one of the critical, most important metrics that teams can focus on now. Now that we understand that customer experience is really important and that test coverage is something that helps us move the needle as it comes to customer experience, let's think about where we are with the overall DevOps transition, right? The same survey, the same report that I referred to identified that only 11% of participants of that survey are running what they would consider a full DevOps kind of automated practice. So what this means, at least in the context of the survey that we ran, is that participants that we engage with is really that DevOps is still predominantly in transition. It's not complete. Most teams are still scaling up to a DevOps practice. And we really talk about this in basically where are they transitioning to. They want to transition to a world where we have high velocity, high throughput teams where we can introduce a lot of innovation. It's high quality products as well that we're producing, and we operationalize that effectively, and it's ultimately repeatable. But this is really the dream state, because unfortunately, more often than not, we see an environment where quality engineering QA becomes a bottleneck, right? So you either have high velocity change and ultimately low quality, and you deliver a lot of poor quality software, or you have a high quality software on the other end, but you really don't have the throughput that you need to meet the demand for digital innovation. And this is coming from your customers as well as competitors as well, who may be further along the DevOps journey, who may be able to respond to things and build out innovation more quickly ultimately. So it can be a real threat. So this is really where the low-code test automation platforms with intelligence come to help, because they fundamentally enable the teams to innovate faster without sacrificing that quality. And in the next section, I'll try to show you and help understand why low-code, why intelligence, and why these things are important to the quality engineering specifically and software development practices in general. So let's think about low code first and what that ultimately means. We've had a huge shortage of talent in the technology space for the last 10 years or potentially even longer. And if you ask leaders, companies, executives, large or small companies, what's their really number one concern out of all their concerns? It's the availability of talent. Because if you don't have the talent to meet the demand of digital innovation, then you have a huge business challenge, especially after COVID. Now your customers are more and more in a digital world, and the chart on the left only goes up to 2019. I imagine that number is pretty close to 100% now for 2020, 2021, and now this year. And so on one side, ultimately, we have a highly educated but ultimately underemployed workforce that are not super technical by their training or education. And on the other side, we have this huge demand for these tech professionals in app development, quality engineering, among other things, really. And in order for this underemployed population to participate in this tech space, they need to figure out an education path to bridge that gap. And so they need to find a way to learn the technologies and the tools that we have in our current workflows today. The education path really has been limited for a long time because of the complexity of the tools and they've really been challenging as well. So there's a high barrier for entry ultimately. And this is why the problem is so pronounced. Now, again, in the past 10 years, we've started to see solutions to this problem. Two key movements in the industry, and you've probably experienced it as well. So we start seeing a lot of educational programs that come online. So these are boot camps, online trainings where you go and you an accelerated course for a day, a few weeks, a little bit longer, and you get training on things like JavaScript and other things like that. And this is also, we see these programs becoming simpler too. That's where no code app development comes into play, as well as low code platforms, right? Their intention is to help that workforce that's not highly technical participate in the technology space to help meet the need with the demand for technological innovation that we have right now. One key part of this as well is that ultimately, when you abstract this away a little bit, especially with platforms, SaaS platforms, there's a lot less to worry about. You can keep your team more global. You can keep your global team focused on testing and not worried about things such as maintenance and infrastructure that you have to have and own yourself. Yes, you'll still need a lot of expertise there on the QA side to manage your environments, manage your data, everything that's happening under test, your apps, but you don't perhaps need the same expertise to manage and deal with all that infrastructural overhead that's also contributing to cost, contributing to a headcount that you need to fill, and so on. And so that's really where I think the low code comes into play. And when you think about the quality space specifically, and you think, like, what do we have in the quality space? We have a lot of quality engineers, QA professionals that have been trained to do something like manual QA. And in a world of DevOps and high velocity, high throughput, automation is a really important agenda item, right? Because you have to have the high velocity, high throughput. If you're not automating your CI/CD, you're not automating your testing, well, you have the workforce and they're ultimately not trained to do the work and to manage that successfully. And so where the work ends up is, well, they really have this highly technical software engineering backlog for engineers to address. And that's fine at the feature and capability level, but it really becomes a challenge when you're trying to build software at scale. And today we expect developers to be superheroes, to manage all of the testing, all of the creation, all of the validation. But it's too much to expect ultimately. There's different types of tests, from functional to non-functional, and you need the workforce to come and help you maintain that throughput, the high velocity, so your team can focus on building new things rather than testing and maintaining what they have today. And that's where specifically quality low code experiences come into play, because that low code experience enables your workforce that's less technical to participate in your DevOps pipeline, to help you build high quality software, help you automate your tests for functional, non-functional, and then ultimately help you innovate at the speed that your business needs for your customers to stay competitive and so on. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we're taking the code away completely, right? I think that's where important to put the emphasis on low code platforms to do that, and test automation to support extending your solution with code so that we maintain that balance of customizability and flexibility that you have native to coded experiences, high code experiences, you'd say. We want to enable the people to do effective work in an interface that's most aligned with their skill set. If you're highly technical, we'll give you the flexibility to work in a more technical fashion. We'll also give you the ability to customize that with code. And if you're not highly technical, we'll give you that low code experience, an experience that's aligned fully with that more code focused experience. A great example of this is actually JavaScript snippets in the mabl platform, which we've built to enable more technical users to build almost basically functions in their code in JavaScript that other users and other members of their team who are less technical can consume and implement without needing to touch or even see the JavaScript, for example. The bonus is that for developers as well, they can treat it similarly to a function. So everyone doesn't have to touch this every single time they're trying to use it. One thing that cloud really enables as well is to separate out the tasks that are involved with generating data that you have basically to need to do manually with solutions to generate insight at different levels. With a coded solution, it would take a lot of time to get the screenshots, layer in something as well that's capturing the HAR file, the DOM snapshot on every step, layer something in again, like that's test case management to get reporting, and you have to make sure that you get information from what the developers are doing locally, the tests that they're creating on their own, then export that into another tool, try to piece together a full analysis. But with a solution that abstracts that a little bit, and we'll touch on this a little bit further in the next section, you get a lot of these for free, from relating that up to how your test coverage is failing, your pass fail rate, to specific things like network errors that we noticed, visual changes that were identified, in different failure modes across your testing. And one final note about how low code can really dramatically increase your team's efficiency is when you integrate that into your pipeline. Because low code systems are cloud-based, it becomes easier than ever to tie these testing activities to code merges, pull requests, so that you'd actually require a passing test before code can be merged. That's what we do internally. And because it's based in the cloud, a lot of these tests can be automated, especially at earlier stages in development. Things that are built locally, ephemeral preview environments, for example, to help prevent bugs from progressing. And just to note, the cost of a bug reaching production in terms of rework time and cost and impact on your users can ultimately be 30 times higher than if that same bug was caught in the requirements phase, or the coding phase of development. And here I'm sharing an example of a low-code approach to testing in practice. In this example, an e-commerce brand called Ritual is practicing a continuous testing with a low-code approach. This example from Ritual, a healthcare company, is great because they have a sophisticated testing activities built in every stage of the development process. Their view of how testing happens from the preview environment, feature brands, through shared development environment, all the way through production. They have visibility into code quality at every stage of development. And while members of Ritual's engineering team create tests earlier in development, their QA team is still involved in overseeing those activities, in addition to testing organizations, things that basically they do normally in staging and production. And I'll also talk a little bit about in a sec how different team members can contribute to this. And in this, basically, one thing I want to call out here is the ability for really each team member to have shared ownership and have a seat at the table, QA especially. QA evolves from something that's been traditionally a bottleneck that we talked about earlier, a gate that something has to get through. And QA managers can actually manage the whole process that starts with developers making changes on a branch locally in the tools that they want to, both in code and to test themselves. Automation engineers can manage tests that cover their builds and are fine-tuning, expanding coverage, looking for opportunities to cover new scenarios. And manual testers can be doing things like migrating tests over from manual test cases, or even doing things like keeping up the current tests that have failed, or ultimately doing exploratory testing, testing things that are not possible perhaps to test with automation tools today. So everyone's involved in the same tool, but in different and complementary ways. I also want to take a moment to touch on the intelligence piece in low-code automation. Because these low-code platforms are cloud native, we're able to reap a lot of the benefits of cloud-based execution and learnings to make testing ultimately more intelligent as well. I think the first thing I'll refer to as I was preparing this presentation actually was an analysis done by Gartner. And if you haven't heard of Gartner, they're one of the technology market analyst companies that really have some great research. So they recently published an article about the use cases of intelligence in software development and testing. And this prism is interesting, one, because it summarizes what the use cases are that are highly visible from a technology perspective and also deliver a lot of high business value. And you can see in the prism and use cases like somewhere towards the center, 5, 6, and 7, you see self-healing, testing insights, customer journey-driven tests. These are use cases where that if implemented in the testing or in the context of testing, they can become accelerators in the DevOps environment. they deliver value beyond the low code. And that's ultimately the value that you get from low code is going beyond just the benefits from testing. So let me give you two examples of intelligence that I think the day-to-day operations really help both engineers and quality engineers and QA professionals. This one is one of the capabilities that we've actually worked on pretty recently. We call it intelligent weights. It's part of our core test automation platform now. And so what this capability does is it actually learns from your application. The first run goes a little bit slower. How long does it take for your application to load in this environment? And it uses that data to tell the test when it should move from the stage of just waiting for the page to load to when it starts executing. Because a lot of time historically, you try to add some weights into your pipeline and you just sort of guess and say, well, 10 seconds sounds good. And because otherwise, what's going to happen? Your tests are going to break, your application's not going to be ready, and maybe you had a hard-coded XPath that just simply doesn't exist at that point when your test goes to click that. So this is a type of intelligence where you actually don't need to worry about it with low-code intelligent platforms. Because it's not only going to find the time the first time that your application needs to load through machine intelligence, it's going to incorporate that continually into what it knows about your test on that environment and continually update that. Because ultimately our QA environment is not going to load in the same time as something running locally, as something running in production. And they kick off and modify your tests based on that. Another example that was highlighted in the Gartner research is this auto-healing capability. That's right, it's pretty core to mabl as well. If you think about like a UI test in a browser, a lot of times you make minor changes to your application's interface, right? You change the text in the button from A to B, you have something that says login and you want to change it to 2 words because you made a spelling mistake or something, or you change the styling a little bit in some of the elements. And without intelligence, with a coded solution, a lot of those changes will actually break your tests. And the next thing you know, you have to maintain the same element because you have a single page app and it's all components and it's reused elsewhere. So now you have several tests that broke. And someone needs to actually go in and figure out not only how to maintain it and change it and make sure that it passes, but you also have to figure out, is this a real problem that's impacting my pipeline? Is this something I need to sound the alarms on? Is this something I can trust? And that makes us a little bit less agile when we can't actually trust the changes that are happening. And so auto healing is great because we collect more data than just a single thing like an XPath, and we're able to understand what it looked like in the past, what it looks like now, and augment the test and update it, and then give you information when that actually passes. And so we understand the context where the element is. We can identify whether the changes introduced are significant enough for us to fail the test, or whether we can fix it, and we can leverage that intelligence piece to keep the test going. And once it passes, we'll actually save that as the new selectors. And a lot of times we see this automation, this auto-healing capability comes to help significantly reduce the maintenance burden. And that's something there that really accelerates innovation because your quality engineers, your developers can focus on building capabilities instead of tracking down all the maintenance issues that may be minor, but ultimately they can also trust your process a little bit more because they know that when a test fails, it's going to be a legitimate problem rather than some just flakiness that they need to hunt down and can't be sure of. So let's start to think about the impact of both of these as well. If we start to think about the impact of both together, specifically in the context of quality engineering, with these two things together, they really take us from the world of manual testing, where you may have spent a lot of time on validating changes, very little time ultimately investing the issues that we might identify within the platform, to a world where we spend much less time on that validation, more time investigating the issues and building automations just in place that will prevent those issues from happening in the future. We can do a lot more there beyond investigation, as well as time spent on exploratory testing, tracking the things down that may not be caught by a coded solution, exploring and adding new test coverage, extending our actual test coverage beyond functional testing, perhaps. And by doing that, we effectively get to a world where we have limited test coverage to a world we have high test coverage and higher confidence. And if we go all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, when I asked the question, how quality engineering or quality assurance professionals can really help drive better business customer outcomes, hope you remember that bit early on. It's the test coverage is a really critical metric there, because there's a correlation between test coverage and customer happiness, right? The report showed us that 80% of teams who report excellent test coverage, they're 4 times as likely to say that their customers love their product. And so ultimately, low code intelligence together in the context of test automation specifically help you drive effective test coverage and ultimately impact the customer or the experiences of your customers. Next, we're going to touch on some of the specifics of the mabl platform as well. And so now that we're aligned on some of the key trends in the market that drive the adoption of test automation, as well as why low-code intelligent test automation is a better path and more scalable and repeatable as well for quality engineering or just engineering teams in general, let's talk a little bit about how the low-code platform such as mabl helps you with this journey. And so first and foremost, we're extremely passionate about quality engineering. We aspire to enable all of you to deliver high quality software to improve the quality of your application without slowing anyone down. And we delivered that platform with our unified platform for quality engineering that combines both functional and non-functional testing and ultimately empowers you to do testing, as we showed earlier with the example from Ritual, across your entire DevOps practice and pipeline. There are a couple important approaches and capabilities that we've adopted here aligned with that low code and intelligent philosophy that we discussed earlier. So first and foremost, our job one as a company is to build the easiest low code test automation solution. In our company meetings, especially if you hear me talk about things, you'll hear a lot about this job one over and over again, because every decision we make, we try to make sure it's aligned with that job one, which again is to build the easiest low code test automation platform. And so for some specific examples, you can see that the experience that we provide, and we used this imagery earlier, on the left side, it's very easy to use what we call the mabl trainer, which is our low code test creation tool. And so you kind of initiate the user journey in the browser, and we record that click and run it in the cloud and provide you insights that you need to monitor the quality of your application, including test coverage. And in this specific example, you can see how much more information is captured on just a simple click for login. And there's much more we can do here around complex test functionality that you can run with JavaScript snippets, perhaps. And it's really about separating the intent from implementation, letting the intelligence handle a lot of the understanding and the data collection and all of that for what your application looks like, what it needs to know, what defines this login element that we're actually trying to click on. And so beyond that, we also want to make sure that we deliver repeatability and making sure that you don't have to use the same thing over and over again. You don't build it over and over and you end up with this complicated thing that you just can't figure out how to solve, or it breaks in multiple places, because you ultimately, you want what you use to be reusable, right? And so we have specific flows, for example, that like a login flow, and really there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to build the login flow once and just reuse it when you need to, and have this reusability over and over to help uncover more capacity and capabilities for your team. So if you were to be working in mabl and you wanted to make a change to your login flow, you can create a branch, and that will, instead of updating the 150 tests that you have that all need to log into your app to start the testing process, you just have one simple flow that you make one change to in one test, and it's replicated everywhere, and you merge that back in, and it's just seamless ultimately. And you don't have to worry about, did I get to every single test that had it? It just works. And then it's important to make sure that we also have everyone across the DevOps pipeline participating in delivering the high quality software from the code to the local level, as we discussed earlier. And so this is a great example of our JavaScript capabilities as well. It's making sure the entire team can leverage the coded pieces just as easily as the low code pieces. So when someone actually creates a JavaScript snippet on the right, someone on the left, that's all they see. They don't actually have to go in and edit the code and make changes there to get it to work. It's all working pretty seamlessly there. Now, in terms of intelligence as well, we touched on this topic already. Some of the intelligent capabilities that we're really proud of, the auto healing capability, where our platform tracks over 30 different attributes of your element from text, CSS, you name it, and learns from that context as well as the bigger context of your application to understand what that specific element looks like. Then we have intelligence in the platform that every time you make a change, it tries to understand the significance of the change and tries to either auto heal if that change is significant enough for the test to fail, or if it tries to fix it on its own and provide you a report that says, here's how many auto heals that you've actually done for your team. And this really significantly reduces the maintenance burden that teams need to test. And with recent intelligent wait work as well, it's sort of a twofold problem. You have actually finding the thing on the page, but you also have to make sure your timing is right. Because if you arrive at the test at the page too early and you look at it and you try to find the element that maybe takes a while to load, then of course you're going to have problems when the page isn't ready and none of the elements are there. And now you have to go back because your test failed and add that wait and sort of repeat the process over and over again. So it's great when the platform can actually go a little bit slower the first time, identify when it needs to actually make the changes, make those and sort of have you on your way without knowing that it's actually happening under the hood. And I think I got a little bit ahead of myself there because this is exactly what that example is. One thing we released pretty recently is it's ultimately just about learning what your application looks like, how it behaves, and segmenting that across environments to make sure that each time we see your application, because ultimately when you're running your tests, you need them to pass every time, not just in production, not just in QA. You need them to pass every time so you can trust them. So it's making sure that we understand the app and how it looks separately across environments, as well as just how it looks normally and how long it takes to load in general. And then all of these are really valuable, and you ultimately also want to see how you're actually improving the quality of your platform. And that's where reports and insights that we deliver come into play as well. Not only do we empower you to build this low code intelligent automation platform, scalable and future-proof, but we also enable you to see the trends over time, how you're improving your test coverage, how you can actually quantify that, how you're improving the quality of your software, which ultimately helps drive better business outcomes. And this is across functional testing that you see on the left, understanding test runs, new tests, how many things you've run recently and the pass fail rate of those, but also moving on to non-functional things like performance, things on the right like accessibility as well. What sort of risk am I carrying with when I go to deploy this recent change? And so since teams who want to adopt quality engineering really ultimately need low code and intelligent test automation, the power of these concepts can really drive meaningful results for teams. We see a 50% reduction in deployment time and 85% reduction maintenance efforts, and maintaining this goal across hundreds if not thousands of tests. And we see a 90% increase in test coverage as well, which, as we mentioned, ultimately drives customer happiness and helps drive business outcomes. And I want to focus on that one specifically because if you think about it, when the difference between having like good test coverage and really great, excellent test coverage that you can believe in, that sort of that difference is subtle, but it really matters because that's the point when you can really trust what's happening. And even though you released a bug in production with a low code solution, you can make quick changes to that and then know, okay, that's covered now. I can run my testing again. Happens in the cloud. I don't need to worry about making sure everything's set up properly. And I can respond much, much more quickly and push that to production because I know the other cases are covered by my testing. I know that my testing actually lines up with what my users are doing because I have like real user data that's telling me I should be running a lot of Safari tests, or I should be running a lot of mobile web tests on Chrome, for example. And so ultimately I can respond faster with much higher confidence there. And so these are really the real outcomes from our real customers that we work with every day, and that our low code and intelligent approach helps them accomplish this. And so to summarize the key takeaways, we spoke about the market trends, the digital transformation that are really adding pressure on companies to innovate faster. The customers are expecting better experiences now, and it's not just customers as well, but now employees are expecting better products to work, which really sort of adding pressure for these companies to adopt DevOps practices, process, increase their throughput and velocity that ultimately drives the need now more than ever for effective quality assurance in the process. We also discussed how low code and intelligent approaches can help you reduce that maintenance burden, help you establish a more repeatable, scalable testing approach, quality assurance approach in general for your organization, and to help your teams innovate faster. And last but not least, we also discussed how we can help you accomplish this, your quality goals, drive better outcomes for your organization when you're using a tool like mabl. And so just wanted to say a big thank you all for joining. We do have a good bit of time for questions, so I'm happy to open up the floor if you have anything there. Feel free to leave them in the chat. We can also kick things off right now if you're interested. Cool. So the first one here, how do you see the role of QA professionals changing over the next 2 to 4 years? One thing that I alluded to in the presentation earlier was that really see QA having a bigger seat at the table, more of a partner with developers, QA managers, UX, and other stakeholders there, and less sort of focused in the weeds, being handed something like tasks. They ultimately have a special knowledge to bring. I think we'll see more of a focus, more leverage on that knowledge in areas like exploratory testing, for example. I think if you just have developers building the application, they do have a great understanding of the application, but they may not ultimately know the ways to fully test it across all of the different scenarios. They may not actually have access to the data that QA would have. And so I think we'll see them working together more than ever, and perhaps even working with newer parties, business stakeholders as well, who have understandings of ultimately which different scenarios are driving the business outcomes. Should we be focusing on something like bigger enterprise use cases and such? And so how long does mabl take for your intelligence to learn about the application performance before something like intelligent wait actually kicks in? And so within mabl, with the intelligent wait feature, that's actually the first test run. And so the first test run will go a little bit slower, and we'll start collecting all of the data for that specific environment. And as soon as the second run happens, that's when we start incorporating that information into the test runs. And so the more you're running the tests, the more accurate that they will actually get over time, which I think is pretty cool. Here's another one. When would a team need to use the coded feature like JavaScript in a mabl test? This is a good question. I think one of the things that we've probably experienced is you submit a feature request for some product you're using, and you have a very specific use case. You need to generate some odd data there, and you just need to wait for that feature request to move through. And that ultimately is not a great experience. And that's what having a coded part, that's one of the huge benefits of having that coded aspect and that low code aspect to it, is that you can build a lot of this yourself and extend the platform and grow it how you need to grow it in the direction without having to wait around for things to be prioritized. And I think a real situation where you really need that is if you need to develop some very strange data. I think the inspiration for JavaScript snippets at mabl was something about generating social security numbers and some country. I can't recall exactly. That is a difficult problem to generate those. Another one is you could be trying to do some interaction on the page that maybe isn't captured fully by the low code platform, and so you want to extend that pretty well. You want to manipulate the URL somehow and then visit it. And those are great examples of when you may want to have a more code approach that handles exactly the use case rather than trying to figure out with a no code solution how you could do that, which could be certainly difficult. Another one is how can we bootstrap and start measuring test coverage? I think there are definitely a few different ways to measure test coverage. I think one of them that we actually have in mabl today is just looking at, well, in the context of this release you're looking at, there's a page called release coverage. We actually showed it earlier. Have you run all of the tests that you've actually created in this application? And have they all passed? And that's a very basic way to look at that. That's sort of a test case management way to look at things. Have I created the things? Yes. Have they been run recently? Yes. Are they passed? Okay, that's a good metric. I think for just starting out, I think some really advanced ways to look at this and something that I find particularly exciting is to tie this into things like real user data. And so we have an integration with Segment today, and we also have this feature called page coverage. And the page coverage page leverages our link crawler in the application to build an understanding of what your applications actually look like. And we relate that to how your mabl tests are run. But if you're using something like Segment, we're not only relating it to, are you running tests on the specific pages? Are you creating assertions? But we're also collecting data from Segment and saying, here's where your users are. Is your testing actually lining up with where your users are in your application? And so a really great way to look at that is like, am I actually covering those critical journeys that users are really visiting? It can help you uncover areas of your application that you may not have thought users were actually visiting in number. And it could even prompt things like usability sessions on the product or UX side to help understand, like, why are there so many users visiting this page? Oh, actually, it's because we have this problem on a whole different page, and users are trying to work around that and are visiting this page to solve that problem someplace else in the application. So I think that can be particularly insightful as well to help you do things like exploratory testing, whether that's you yourself or someone else doing that. Can you explain in a little more detail about how mabl auto heals a UI change? We talked about it a little bit, and there's ultimately a lot that goes into it. As I mentioned earlier, the first part is really timing. We need to know that the page is in the right state. This is the intelligent wait feature. I think that's one of the most critical things there is if you visit the page too early, then the application is not going to be in the right state. You may be trying to test like a video appears, and of course videos are not going to load that quickly. And so you don't want to visit it before it's entirely there. And if something's completely missing, that may also impact XPaths and other things further down the page as well. The second is an idea of what the element should actually look like and looking at it through that lens, sort of like a scorecard of understanding, like, okay, this is the most important thing that I need to look at. And I saw that it changed frequently, so maybe let me weight that down a little bit versus I know that it's always been login up until now. I should continue to look at that. And so when something changes, mabl runs it against that and looks for alternatives as well to make sure it hasn't just moved. And if we think we found it and it matches up well and we couldn't find any alternatives, then we'll go with the highest confidence one there. And that's ultimately how it works. And it also doesn't do just that. It makes sure that your test passes at the end before it goes and saves things. So if we do make a mistake, mistakes sometimes happen. We're not going to save that and now cause problems for all of your tests because we saved the wrong thing. Your test needs to pass for us to actually mark that as valid. I think that is all the questions here. So, without further ado, thank you so much for joining. We still do have some time if you want to ask some questions. So I'm happy to chat further. You can also reach me. I now went to the next page. but thomas@mabl.com. I am on LinkedIn as well. Happy to chat, and the rest of the Mabl team are as well. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thomas, it looks like we do have one more question in the
Oh
queue.
yeah, sure.
Yep, do you see it there?
Oh, I do think I missed it. Sorry, I must be looking at something wrong.
How does mabl measure the code coverage?
Oh, how does Mabl measure code coverage? So actually today, unfortunately, Mabl doesn't have a code coverage capability. That is one thing that is missing from our capabilities. We do actually use, I'm not sure the tool to measure code coverage internally. I know you sometimes see things on a technical channel that's like, hey, we need 95% on this, and I'm at 94.59. I just have to create that one more test there. We do look at predominantly what we can access in the state of the application when we actually test it, and so that's the data that populates. Most of it that's through a link crawler, as well as things that are captured from the tests as they run themselves. When we visit a new page, we'll note that it will populate within the page coverage feature. And then we also have third party, not exactly third party data, but data from tools like Segment that go in and populate that as well. And we get as much of a view as we can of your application as it appears, sort of in the context of what your users are experiencing end to end. And so you can actually have a lot of data in there if you're testing full end-to-end experiences that go into other tools. And so you can get a lot of data in there as well. And those are the main focuses for coverage today. I know it would be really exciting to have code coverage, but that's unfortunately not something we have right now.
All right, thank you. That does look like the last question we have for the day. Thomas, could you just remind us of how webinar attendees can reach you?
Oh, sure. Of course, you can reach me. Let me go back.
Yep.
Thomas@mabl.com. I also have the LinkedIn there. Not going to read out the whole thing, but it's TJLVN, just a little mashup of most of my initials. So
Great.
great. Thank you so much.
Yep. And with that, DZone would like to thank Thomas for an outstanding presentation. DZone would also like to thank mabl for providing our audience with a great webinar. Lastly, thank you to everyone who attended today, and we hope you learned something new that will help you in your developer career.